Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to our 89th Right and Left Discussion Forum. Before we begin our program, I'd like to express our sadness at the passing of Charlie Ackerman. Charlie was a longtime friend and contributor to this program. As a journalist, he was the embodiment of the word civility, which is why we loved having him on this show. This morning we're going to discuss a topic that I'm sure that Charlie would have loved to have weighed in on. And we have this program about twice a month to demonstrate how open-minded discussion on contentious topics can expand our knowledge and lead to shared understanding. Today's topic asks the questions, have American voters degraded the office of president by using a selection criteria that has little or nothing to do with the skills, abilities, and talents required to perform the duties of the presidency? Today's panel, beginning on my left, is Patty Haskins, retired math teacher and member of the Wadsworth City Council. On her left is Jerry Ritzman, partner of Ritzman Pharmacies. On his left is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. On his left is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services. Patty, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Is it my imagination, or things like gender, race, religion, and positions on single issues beginning to play a bigger role in voters' choices than the demonstrated ability as an executive?
It's your imagination.
No, it is not.
No, I really think that voters always have considered single issues, whether it be race, gender, religion, whatever the case has been. And this has been something that has gone on for a long time, because people tend to consider not what's good for all, but what's best for them. And I don't want to make that sound selfish. What they're doing is they're considering the issue that affects them the most, and then tend to support that candidate that supports the same idea that they have. And I think we've seen this for years and years. If you go back to the Kennedy election, Kennedy was a Catholic. No Catholic had been elected for president prior to that. There were many people that voted for Kennedy simply because he was a Catholic. Conversely, there were many people that voted against him because he was a Catholic, and they thought the Pope was going to run the United States government.
As a matter of fact, it was more overt than people remember. Norman Vincent Peale headed up a group called Protestant Ministers Against a Catholic in the White House. I don't think anyone could get away with anything quite that overt.
No. And it was, and it happened. Another word, Catholic, was it Nell Smith a Catholic, if I'm not mistaken, and was soundly defeated, and
Herbert Hoover,
because of the fact that he was Catholic. I mean, you could even go back and say that the issue of slavery in elections was the single issue that people looked at, and they looked at how that, and voted by how that particular issue affected them. Gender and race, it maybe didn't seem like an issue to people, except for the fact that you never had black Americans or female Americans running for president, because there was a bias and they could not get elected. Even on local issues and so forth, people tend, I know as a teacher, I was president of the WEA for many years, and one of our jobs was to screen candidates for possible endorsement by the OEA. And we would send out forms to the candidates where they would all be asked various questions, and then those candidates would come in and they would be interviewed, all being asked the same questions. But the only questions that were being asked were about education. And the idea is that if teachers did not support candidates that were favorable to their views of education, nobody else would, because that was not the major issue for many people. We look at it today. There are people that voted for Obama because he was black, but there were just as many probably that voted for Obama
or against him
because he was black.
Yeah.
We look at the abortion issue. There are many people that are voting in this particular election based upon the stand of the candidate on the abortion issue, because it is what affects them. You have doctors that will vote on a particular issue in a certain way because that is what affects them. So have voters degraded it in the recent? No, I think this is a trend that has gone on for many years in our political system.
Jerry, what are your thoughts?
Well, just kind of an aside, I guess you talked about Norman Vincent Peale and his campaign. I guess those anti-Catholic sentiments now are just expressed in inter-campaign emails, not publicly. Anyway. I don't know. One opinion or one thought that I have is that I wonder if a lot of people, we're talking about degrading the campaign, if people for a long period of time have decided, even at the very beginning of a campaign, who they're going to vote for, and then they have to look for reasons to support them, if it's kind of a backwards proposition. Yeah. Now, your question again, repeat the question again that you asked at the beginning.
Well, I'll repeat it word for word.
Yeah.
Is it my imagination, or are things like gender, race, religion, and positions on particular issues playing a bigger role in voters' choices than candidates' demonstrated executive ability?
Okay. I wonder if the executive ability required for the president right now is tested in them becoming the candidate. Does the ability to get in with your party, to become a leader in the party, does the ability to attract voters, does the ability to play politics or get cooperation from people who don't totally agree with you, are those the abilities of the president, and that somebody who can survive that campaign and become the candidate, is that a test of those abilities that are required as
Would
president?
you think, though, that Trump has gone around the Republican superstructure?
Yes. Yeah, and maybe now that is what is required of a president. Don't know. I'm not saying one way or another, but that's just a thought.
I think you're both touching on something here too that I've thought about, and I think it's individual choices that are being made here. You're talking about, is this new? I don't think so. A single issue particularly, Teapot Dome, 5440 or fight, it goes back a long time. And speaking personally, the idea of personality and charisma, as a callow, wet behind the ears college student, when Adlai Stevenson came to town, wow, here is a college-educated professor running against a general. Why should I not be for him? It turns out Eisenhower's a pretty darn good president, but anyway.
Well, he proved that nobody really had to be president.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think that's true. That the single issue is very important, whether it's abortion, whatever it is. I mean, for me, I know I'm influenced by charisma, by what people say and do, whether or not, sometimes whether it reflects upon their actual proven ability. On the other hand, in this particular election, I find myself that I have to think on the broader picture, because in the one hand, the Republican candidate is absolutely reprehensible to me. The Democratic candidate has I really worry about the excessive hubris that's been displayed in her entire career. But because I am—
You wouldn't use the word deplorable, though, would you?
No, not really. But, whatever the language, it's the whole general attitude, I think, that she has displayed, and it got her into trouble with things like emails.
He's a chemist, not a linguist.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So what goes on
linguist.
here is, in my mind, is that because I am a liberal Democrat, I will have to go with the candidate what will help to promote the last 8 years, which I see as a positive thing. I don't see anything for me much that the Republicans have done in the last 8 years that I can admire. Such things as not having a hearing on a Supreme Court candidate, for example. That's a constitutional duty. Why are they not doing that? So things like that. I'm going to go with what I see as positive and go with that candidate. Now, I think I haven't always been that way.
But when you think, Ron, that what the actual responsibilities are of the President of the United States, well, number one, being the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, number two, heading up the executive branch of the government that has about a $3 trillion budget.
Huge job.
And that the major responsibility is to select executive talent to lead the various functions of government and to provide them with their strategic marching orders and to make sure that they're carried out. These are the really rather boring parts of being President of the United States, but they're spelled out in the Constitution.
And how do you know if they have that ability if they haven't demonstrated it?
Well, I know
that's in ways, is it business executive decisions? Well, there's pretty shady practices going on there on one case. You got to look at that. You're exactly right, but I don't think that weighs heavily in the minds of most voters.
No, I don't think that it does. Bryan?
Well, I'm not sure if either candidate is qualified to run the presidency. I think sometimes we get into a dogma where one party needs to elect the first black or the first woman, and they fail to look at the actual qualifications of that individual. I could say the same thing, except insert Republican. If I have to hold my nose and vote for Donald Trump, using that particular, logic, the issue that I see is that the government has become so large that you really need somebody that has experience in either running a state, involved in being able to bring people together, and that's what we've lacked over the last 8 years. There's really been very little compromise. You take a freshman senator with no experience whatsoever in running anything, and you put him in the presidency, and you get what we've experienced over the last 8 years. I'm troubled by both candidates. I don't think either one of them deserve to be sitting in the Oval Office. I'm not sure how we correct that. I think the mainstream media magnifies that affinity voting. Either you're the NRA voter or you're the abortion voter or you're all about women's rights, and you're just trying to pick and choose which candidate best, as Ron has put it, best sort of agrees with you, and you can check off so many of those boxes, and then you decide you're going to vote for that individual. So I really think that this particular election cycle sadly is going to leave us with an individual that doesn't belong to sit in the Oval Office. Has no credentials whatsoever, and Mr. Trump does not belong. Has not demonstrated anything that would say that he would be worthy of that office, and I believe the office is bigger than the individual. I can say the same thing for Mrs. Clinton. I don't believe she belongs there. I think it's her turn, and the Democrats want to be the first party to put a woman in office, and they're just laser focused on that. It doesn't make any difference what she's done in the past or what she lacks.
I have some very staunchly Democratic friends. They're well enough off that every year they max out their amount of contributions they could give financially. And they say if it were anybody but Trump, Hillary wouldn't have had a chance.
I'm right there with you. and I think you can go back on all the tapes. I've been pretty consistent about my.
The media gave him billions of dollars.
Sure, they did. They created him.
TV time.
They've created Mr. Trump, and that's what we're stuck with. And now everybody's crying about it in the media. And you know,
Well,
you push him through.
You mentioned the lack of qualifications of our current president. He had a partial term as a senator, and that, but he was identified. I mean, as a a black candidate, and of course he won what 90% of the black vote, which is only what 13% of the voters or something. But there are a tremendous number of whites, including me, who were anxious to see a black in the White House. I wish it would have been a different one.
He was also a constitutional law professor as well.
He was, and he proved that maybe he skipped some lessons.
Well, I disagree with that, but
Yeah.
that's another topic for another day.
But no, the whole idea of identity politics, though, seems to me to be running more rampant now than before. A person identified as a black, female, a Hispanic, a white Protestant,
Well,
whatever.
perhaps that's because it's just never happened before.
Yeah.
I know.
Well, we've let
we've never, we have, as a country, have never elected Hispanics traditionally. We don't elect women. I mean, we look at the proportion of the country that is female as opposed to the proportion that is male, and then look at the proportion.
Is that a reason to be a president, though?
Well, but then you look at the proportion in the Senate of females and how many there are. Now, why is that? And I'm not saying that's a reason to be president.
Women
I'm
are too
saying
smart
more.
to want to be in the Senate.
I'm saying, why haven't there been more women put into those positions? Why has it taken this long for a woman to be one of the two major parties?
It's only been
Presidential
in the last 40 years that the woman's role in our society has been redefined. The 40 years in our history is not all that long.
Well,
no,
since
except
World
for-
War II, really, when women took over the.
You can't really
took
point to
over the
any
jobs
party
and go
to
back.
say, oh, they have the edge over doing this. Some of these arguments that they make as far as income inequality and all that kind of stuff, both parties are guilty of that. I see this from more of a mainstream media, Fifth Avenue advertising. It's easy to brand somebody with all the things you really want to hear, and so they put out these commercials. They basically mold that individual into what the focus group. Everything that comes out of a campaign, other than Mr. Trump when he goes off script, which happens a lot, has been focus grouped, and they've picked at each and every word, in what that speech is, and so I think we're reaping the whirlwind on letting that.
Well, you're right about the media thing too. I'm just reading today editorial in the paper this morning. I had a chance to do that this morning before I came about Trump now trending in Ohio to be a bit more, and the analysis of that was Ohio is now more white and less educated. So there is the description of the Trump voter as being more white and less educated. I don't know that that's true, but I know, folks that we're talking about this idea of you and I here of voting because of the overall way you want the party to go, whether who's at the head of it. And I know folks that with Trump signs in their yard, and I know them that they're not like Donald Trump. They're not racist. They're not everything else that he appears to be from what he says.
What other people say.
What other people say.
When he's done.
But yet they're promoting him in their yard. Well, a couple of them have moved their signs back against the house, but
Most of the Hillary signs are are right next to people's homes. So
no, I have mine out in front.
I saw that.
Let's circle back for a moment to the idea that we elected a president who had no discernible qualifications to be president. As Ron pointed out, he's pretty happy with the result of all that. But had it not been for us electing a president that had 2 years in the Senate and a career as a community organizer in Chicago and some time as a law professor, this was his resume. And here we are, what, 8 years later, we wound up with serious Republican candidates like Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, Marco Rubio, Ben Carson, Carly Fiorina, that didn't have any more on their resume to recommend them for president than Obama did. Mm-hmm. Would we have even looked at a Ted Cruz or a Marco Rubio without there having been an Obama? Both of them were, the three of them less than a year in the Senate. Ben Carson never ran for anything. Yeah. Neither had Carly Fiorina. Don't you think maybe there was a shift that took place 12 years ago? That we began looking more seriously at the identity of people rather than their qualifications? Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio being Hispanic. Rand Paul, I'm not sure what recommended him, but Ben Carson being black, Carly Fiorina being female. Don't you think that had a lot to do with them even being on the stage?
No, I think they've been in the forefront for 4 years. I mean, Carly Fiorina had run for, was it Senator of California?
Yeah.
Senator of California, she had run before. Ben Carson had been touted as a intellectual who had political views, and it was bringing in this outside candidate. Rubio had been around for a number of years, giving that infamous Republican response speech where he kept reaching for the water bottle. So these were not, I don't think they were new candidates, and we've seen candidates like this before. I mean, we look at Sarah Palin. She was totally unknown until John McCain picked her as a candidate.
That's right, and to my
that
point,
was unusual.
Why was she picked? Mm-hmm. She was a female, fairly attractive, and popular.
She was a governor, too.
She was a governor.
Yeah, she didn't. Yeah, after she was a mayor, I won't go in there.
If she hadn't been such a space cadet, it might have been a viable candidate.
Right. Right, but they, so I mean, people saw that was not a wise choice, for him. So that in the past, when there were poor choices, people that did not have, political chops. I mean, no matter what you think of Rubio or Cruz or Kasich or Christie, these are not people that are uninformed about what's going on in the world.
But Patty brings up a good point in that, here we had Marco Rubio, and he continued to reach and drink because his mouth got dry.
Yeah.
Right.
And that doesn't play well.
No, it hurt him.
It goes back exactly. It goes back to Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy having the first televised debate, and Richard Nixon looked like
he refused the makeup.
He refused the makeup, and John Kennedy knew exactly what he was doing. So we're getting into identity politics because we're letting the mainstream media tell us what looks good.
Now, when you say mainstream media, you mean Fox as well, right?
I mean them all.
Okay,
all of them.
Because that term is used.
Everybody. I'm talking CNN to Fox to you name them. They all look for the person that plays well to the camera and can read a teleprompter. Most of these individuals, when the teleprompter goes blank, they're stumbling. And President Obama is right up there on the list, So that's unfortunate for us, but we've all probably, in our own little way, have created this monster.
One of the best people that doesn't fit that is Mike Huckabee. Have you ever heard a smoother guy in your life? He's a former minister.
Yeah, minister, and he worked and he had his own television program for years.
Yeah.
Speaking of minister, I got a robocall yesterday from Jerry Falwell Jr. He told me that Jesus wants us to elect a president. Wants us to vote.
One of the reasons why I wanted to discuss this topic, there was I don't remember what network it was. I really watch a back and forth between CNN and Fox to try to find some kind of balance in there. But there was a woman who looked like she was a very well-spoken, well-educated lady being interviewed and asked why she supported Hillary Clinton. She said, well, she's female and it's history. And I thought, wow, what a reason to put somebody in the White House. But we're all doing that. I mean, I'm thinking as an electorate, who really takes the time to go through the boring exercise of looking at somebody's qualifications?
But yeah, and again, though, and there are people that do that, but there are just as many people that are looking at her and saying, I am not voting for her because she is a woman.
So
And-
Patty is voting for a candidate because of their gender. Are both of those sexist?
Yes,
Okay.
of course.
Okay.
That's why I don't do it. I wish there were more women. I wish there was not the bias towards women as candidates that exists. And
The bias against them, you mean?
Yes, absolutely.
What makes you think there's that?
Just simply looking at the numbers of women that are in.
And look how long it took them to get the vote in the first
Just
place.
even get the vote in the first place, and they had to fight and fight hard. I mean, this was not just the United States.
Yeah.
The United States was one of the last countries.
No, but
Major countries
I'm
to
asking
give
right,
women the vote.
right now in this year, 2016, what evidence do you have that there is a significant portion of the electorate that is opposed to any candidate who is female?
I don't know that it's significant. I think there's a great many, but only
Well, a great many would be significant.
only not as opposed to a majority. Only because I have spoken with people. A good friend of mine, female, very diehard Republican, is voting for Hillary Clinton, and I asked her where her husband stood because they both hate Trump, and she said, "Well, he'd never vote for a woman."
Is that right?
Yeah, and there people.
So he's sleeping on the couch then.
Yeah. Well, and, you know, the problem, it's that bias is there.
I imagine that it is, but I have no idea how strong it is, and I have no way of knowing because the evidence isn't out there and obvious. When I think of all of the accusations of discrimination that go on, it's just overwhelming to me. But that's the end of our conversation on this. But I'd like to close with an interesting quote. The ignorance of one voter in a democracy imperils the security of all. JFK. That was a good quote, I think.